Landman episode 1 of season 2 has hit, and we got to talk about that dinner scene. The dishes flying, the hormone comment, Tommy technically being correct, but not exactly relationally smart. Basically, what you got going on here is a toxic marriage, plus oil money, plus emotional grenades flying all over the place. So we're going to unpack that, and I'm going to diagnose the characters that came up in the episode. I'm Trey Tucker. This is Rugged, where we're making your 20s and 30s legendary. All right, let's jump straight to the dinner scene. So we'll get to Tommy in a second, but Angela was the main one I want to focus on for a second, because let's diagnose her even before this scene ever starts, before she has this volcanic explosive reaction of throwing the dishes. All right, so if she were a client of mine, I would start looking for, why is she so emotionally reactive? And why is she so sensitive to anything that might hint at shame? Because emotional reactivity and shame sensitivity, those are big words in the psychological world. And we try to figure out what could be going on, why those things are happening so often, because, man, they happen at a trigger hair in her. Every episode, it's something else. And frankly, I don't know that this character is really being written with the depth that I would want, because they don't really explain much of her backstory to talk about why she is the way she is. So without any explanation, we're left to assume the worst. But if she were a real person, I'd be looking at, what is it about the emotional dysregulation? Because she doesn't seem to have the ability to feel something and then actually process it on her own. Any emotion she tends to feel, it tends to just get blasted and sprayed out at everybody else. I don't know that there's been a moment in season 1 or in this first episode of season 2 where she's actually taken responsibility for something and showed signs of growth and actually taken accountability. So what I'm wondering is, if she were a real person, would she get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? Because that disorder is so characterized by intensity and sensitivity and reactivity and this I hate you, but don't leave me, this back and forth. And she's showing a lot of those signs. So I'm wondering, maybe did Taylor Sheridan base this character off of somebody in real life that he knew? Another part of this is, let's deal with the hormone comment that Tommy made, saying, all right, don't make decisions when it's your time of the month, or whatever the direct quote was. But we'll get to his lack of relational wisdom in a second. But there's a disorder called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. All right, and it has to do with the really intense versions of all the physical and emotional symptoms that women do tend to deal with when they're in their cycle. So this one, we call it PMDD for short. She has a clear, highly sensitive reaction to these moments in her months, and Tommy obviously puts the spotlight on that. But here's some of the symptoms in real life that people can have with PMDD. Severe mood swings, not just normal mood swings, severe mood swings, severe irritability, severe anger, severe anxiety. This is during those moments of the pre-cycle phase. Oftentimes it's marked by depression, hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, although never a rational reason for that, just kind of feeling that way. Also, increased tension, feeling on edge and not being really able to explain it or tie it to a circumstance. Decreased interest in the usual activities that would normally pique their interest, or decreased interest in relationships and connecting to the people that they enjoy. More fatigue, feeling more lethargic, changes in their appetite or their sleep patterns, and then physical symptoms like bloating or headaches. So with her intense reactions, I'm thinking this is a case of PMDD going on, but it's a trauma-linked sensitivity. They don't explain, at least that I can remember, they haven't explained any of her past traumas, but you don't react this high for just this particular reason of Tommy's comment. So a rule of thumb I've learned is that if I'm reacting to something and I'm reacting like on a level 1 to 10 scale, if I'm reacting on a level 6 or above, it's not actually about this thing that just happened. It's more about the stuff in me from the past that this thing is reminding my nervous system of. So she has something going on from her past that's causing her to be so reactionary just at the drop of a hat. And the whole setup, she wants everything to be perfect. She wants everything to be fancy. And she paid the $2,500 for the mushroom, and the tension, you can already tell the tension is just simmering across the table. And her bandwidth is already thin because she wants everything to be perfect. And then if a minute something doesn't go her way or go the scenario that she has painted in your head of perfection, everything goes to crap. And so it's almost this all or nothing, this borderline approach of it's going to be this perfect or I'm going to make everybody suffer on the other direction, the other end of the spectrum. So now let's deal with Tommy for a second. His comment about the hormones, he's basically taken her emotional state and he's making a label out of it. He is labeling her based on the way she's reacting in the moment. Now, he may have plenty of reasons to do that from previous experiences, but when you're around other people, don't do this. Don't do this to somebody when they feel called out and spotlighted for this. It's really emotional malpractice. Because what Angela's really feeling in this moment from Tommy is that, hey, your emotions are not valid. Your argument is just hormones. And really, you're just irrational. And so now I'm going to put the spotlight on what you're insecure about. So in that moment, she's experiencing humiliation, not insight. And I don't know exactly what Tommy's motives here were. I'm sure his motives were to actually help her understand what's going on in herself, but took the totally wrong approach. And when Angela throws the plates, this is exactly what shame dysregulation looks like. All right, she's feeling embarrassed. She's feeling overwhelmed. She's feeling exposed. She wants her dignity back, and she's using physical actions to discharge that emotional overload. Because when you feel all those things, that's a volcano. That's a pressure cooker inside, and it's got to come out somewhere, some way. She didn't choose the healthiest way to deal with it, but it's going to come out one way or another, whether you choose the healthy route to escape it or the unhealthy escape valve. So this shame reactivity, shame dysregulation is what's going on here. And her key line it's really the thesis of the whole thing. She says, I can't help my hormones. I can't control them, but you can control whether you point them out. And that's the whole point. She truly can't control her hormones. She can control how they manifest and how they come out. But her point is a good one to Tommy. You can control whether you point them out, because that's just about being a gentleman and showing grace. And these are the types of problems that need to be dealt with behind closed doors or with a therapist, not in front of family and friends. All right, so here's some takeaways from men just from this scene in the dinner scene. All right, number one, you don't need to point out every flaw you see. You wouldn't want somebody to do that to you if the roles were switched. So just because you're technically right doesn't mean you're actually being emotionally healthy. So number two, when you choose somebody, you're actually choosing their predictable, irrational patterns as well. That's why you got to get to know somebody for a long time before you commit to them long term. The wisdom is know somebody for at least 4 seasons before you get married to them, because we've all got our unpredictable crazy. It's just a matter of which unpredictable crazy can you deal with and which one meshes well enough with you that you guys can push through it. Because ain't nobody perfect, and you got some crazy in you and I got some crazy in me. So we got to see the whole person as deeply and as well as we can before we make that lifelong commitment. Number 3, emotional leadership. Your partner's dignity is one of the biggest things you've got to protect. And so when you expose your partner's weaknesses, it shreds their dignity and it shreds their trust in you. So don't expose it, protect it in public, and then in private, actually deal with the stuff and the root causes. Also, you can't be labeling somebody's dysregulation or toxic behavior in the moment. There's some cases where you need to, if it's something truly dangerous, but when it's something like this is not something to label in the moment. It'd be like telling somebody to calm down when they're already flipping out, because how well does that ever work when you tell somebody to actually calm down? If you want to double their intensity and make them even more emotionally reactive, tell them to calm down. See how that works. So don't do that. Now, the whole lesson here, if I could boil it down here, connection is better than correction. Build that connection, and over time, the correction will come naturally. All right, now let's shift over to Tommy. I'm going to diagnose him in a second, but let's think about the changes that he's going through for a minute. Number 1, he's dealing with a new job, a new title. He's lost his best friend, not to mention all the new stuff he had to deal with people moving in with him and all the pressures and PTSD he probably has from being kidnapped by the cartel. So the dude's got a lot of stuff that he's adjusting to and trying to work his way through, on top of the pressure of his daily job anyway. So I took some notes here. He's dealing with this identity role shift. He's moving from fixer, which is what he was in season 1, now to executive. And when you change your identity in terms of your work title alone, that takes a long time to really sink in, where your nervous system feels comfortable in that new role. So moving from fixer to executive, and all of the connotations that an executive has to portray, and the pressures that come with that, and the way you got to dress and the way you got to talk and the events you got to go to. None of that stuff is what he's really naturally enjoys and what he actually wants to do. So all of the identity whiplash that comes with that is a lot of what's going on. So he's showing signs of the strain of all this. He's got irritability. He's avoiding. He makes the comment of, well, I guess I'm going to have to start drinking again. The emotional numbness, which also goes with the drinking. And, he you can see the look on his face. Billy Bob Thornton does a great job of portraying this role, because you can see he starts to let the emotion in and sink in, which is actually how to get it out eventually. But he's got this way of just shutting it off and burying it somewhere deep in there. And I think that's where the alcohol comes in, to try to keep that emotion numb into where he's buried it. But he performs exceptionally well in the workplace under all those kinds of pressures, but then he collapses under the emotional weight of the pressures of home. So he's got this divided head, divided soul going on here. And I think three things are happening with him. He's got some chronic stress and identity fallout, which is what we talked about, some PTSD, adjacent occupational patterns. In other words, because of the past traumas he's dealt with, he's living in constant fight or flight. And then also number three, he's got conflict avoidance. Let's go through each of them really quickly. So the chronic stress and identity fallout, that the actual diagnosis I would give Tommy if he were a real person is adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and disturbance of conduct. And some of the symptoms that go along with that diagnosis are emotional exhaustion, irritability, avoidance, and relapse cues. Again, back to that relapse of the drinking comment. With the PTSD, he's showing traits of the hypervigilance, which is that constantly staying in fight or flight mode. He gets quickly defensive in his reactions, and that's another sign of PTSD. And then emotional shutdown under pressure, which he's pretty dang good at. You can make some of these PTSD symptoms work for you, but typically they only work in one area of your life, and then they start to destroy the other areas. So use trauma to your advantage while you're actually healing it, because you can hang on to those benefits once you've healed the trauma, and then you've got some skills you can use that aren't actually controlling you. You're controlling them after you've healed that trauma. Finally, the conflict avoidance, and really for him, it's emotional blind spots. This is what we would work on in therapy together if he were with me as a client. It's really consistent. I don't know that he would get this diagnosis, but it's consistent with somebody that has dismissive, avoidant type of attachment styles. And he has a lot of difficulty with identifying emotions. I think for him, it's just all stress. And there's probably some love or some sort of version of love in his mind in there, but he's pretty dense when it comes to identifying some of the emotional aspects of life. So he's navigating the role shift. He's showing all these external signs of internal strain. So I'm going to be interested to see how they really write him and his character for the rest of this season. All right, now let's deal with Cooper, Tommy's son. Cooper has major father wound issues. He is so craving validation from his dad. He wants to know that his dad sees him as good enough, that he's capable of following his footsteps. And you can tell he's just trying with everything he's got to prove that he's good enough, that he's got what it takes to follow in that oil business and really live up to his dad's shadow. So the deep father wound and what I call identity insecurity, those are the things that we would start dealing with in some therapy sessions if we were together. He's really ambitious. That's a huge key to his success, and I would never try to take that away from him. What we need to do is take that ambition and give it the right engine, the right motivation, so that he can actually find fulfillment. Because if he's using his ambition to try to prove something as an identity and try to win his dad's approval, he's always going to be left empty. So he's got a high need for validation. We call it validation seeking in therapy. And he's also impulsive, which can work out for you sometimes, but it can also really backfire on you sometimes. But he's got high sensation seeking traits. He takes risks, which is what you need, but those risks can also get you burned. He's really focused on reward. So in psychology, we call that reward dependence. And it's got this ADD-like energy to him, even though he seems physically mellow and not real excitable, but inside you can see he's got all these anxieties running under the surface. But for maybe because of the way he grew up in that chaotic, traumatic household, he just learned he needed to stay cool and chill and not take up space, emotional space in that loud, we'll call it loud environment where his mom and his sister were causing all the high maintenance drama. So also with the novelty seeking and the intensity and the impulsivity, he's basically trying to base his self-worth on his performance. And that's what so many of us guys do. In fact, I would say until we realize that this is even a concept, we all have this performance-based self-worth. We think that our value comes from what we do and how useful we are and how good we are and how successful we are at all the different metrics. And that's just always going to leave us unfulfilled. So we'd work together. Cooper and I would work together on this mask that he wears. And we'd work on that insecure attachment, the father wounds that came from it. We'd work on that hunger for his father's approval, because you got to get to the point where you don't need your dad's approval, because you've gotten. One of the things I do is I help heal the trauma in a guy like this, because the dad may never give the approval. He may not have the emotional capacity to give his son the approval and the affection that he needs. So then what do you do when you don't get that? That's what he and I would work on to heal the trauma. And then from an earthly perspective, I'd help him find role models and father figures in his life that he can lean on. But then ultimately I would ask him, what do you think about when God calls himself Father? Because a lot of times people run away from the concept of God being their father because their earthly dad has been such a so damaging to them that they don't even want to think of God in that term. So ultimately, though, I believe we were created by God, who calls himself Father, and he wants to give us all the emotional and soul support needs that we have. He wants to fill those needs. So we'd work on that. And then finally, we'd work on identity confusion, where we help him figure out who he is apart from his job title and what gives him worth. All right, now let's deal with Cami, Monty's widow. In the speech she gives to all the oil men, she shows some awesome traits, and then she shows some pretty toxic traits like narcissism. And we'll deal with that here in a second. But let's think about the room she walked into. This is like walking into a room an aquarium full of sharks. All these other oil men, they're ready to pounce on this company and take it down and buy it and then use the profits for their own gain. So they just view her as Monty's like trophy wife. They don't think she's got any talent whatsoever. So there's no respect. They walk in, they're skeptical, they're dismissive, and they're just ready for her to fail right in front of them in this speech. But here's my favorite line from the speech. She goes, the only difference between me and Monty is I'm meaner. Test me, and you'll find out how much. Enjoy your lunch. I paid for it with your bleeping money. So after that, she gets the big applause and everything. So I think what's going on here is men, we respect somebody who's bold. We can tell when somebody is pushing and trying to be fake and putting on this false bravado and the fake confidence mask versus somebody who's saying, hey, look, here's who I am, and I'm not afraid of you, and I'm going to keep coming. Men respect that, and they genuinely gave her that applause because she turned the tables on them. She gave them somebody that they didn't think that she was. So that crowd reaction, I love the human nature of it. From silence to the surprise of it. And let's talk about her from a psychological perspective. She has high assertiveness and strategic dominance. Fancy psychological terms here, right? But if she was sitting with me, these are the types of terms I'd be writing down in my notes. So high assertiveness and strategic dominance, those are traits that are consistent with narcissism. Not saying necessarily that she's a narcissist, but some of those traits are found in narcissists. Now, we all need some level of assertiveness and dominance, and we got to know when to use it and when not to use it. Problem with narcissists is they don't know when to stop, and they don't really care when to stop and who not to use it on. So the power, the grandiosity, the demand for respect, those things are narcissistic traits, and in small doses, in certain circumstances can be helpful, but never in high amounts. Also, she's got a high need for control and perfectionism. So I would wonder, is there some sort of obsessive compulsive personality trait going on here? I would just get curious about that. Also, there's a term in psychology called survivorship armor. Survivorship armor, it's this hyper independence after you've lost your partner, after you've lost her, in her case, her husband, that I wonder, is she being extra independent and extra bold and dominating just to survive in this high pressure environment, because she saw from being married to Monty all those years, this is what it's going to take. But I wonder if she's even taking it even further, just putting on that armor, because she's got to show that she's a survivor. And like the idea there is like, I got to be bold in order to protect myself, and I've got to hit first to show that nobody can hurt me. I'm the only one that can do some damage. So I wonder if that's actually what's happening here. So bottom line is, Cami didn't win that crowd over by explaining herself. She actually won them over by embodying strength. And she was letting the dominance be on display, but in this case, at least, it wasn't toxic dominance. It was effective. And using that toxic dominance, she shattered their expectations, and she shattered their preconceived hierarchy of who was the big fish in this room. And people have to recalibrate when somebody walks in with that authentic power and that real confidence. It makes them step back and rethink how should I approach this person and how should I approach my strategy. And that's what she set out to do, and it was a success. And the opposite of it is people really don't respect timidity. It's fine to be meek, which is strength under control, but don't be timid. God's put you on the earth on purpose, for a purpose, and you have value. So don't step back and just assume everybody else is somehow better or more valuable than you. Don't be timid, because you're not going to really walk in your purpose in that way, and you won't have the effect on people that you're supposed to have the effect on. So have some respect for yourself by showing a clarity of presence here. So if you look at the whole episode from one bird's eye view, what you have is a bunch of people, everybody in the episode is fighting to either be seen, respected, or validated. And that's ultimately what we want in day-to-day interactions in our relationships. We want people to see us, we want people to respect us, and we want people to know that we have value. Now, we can go into other aspects of that in other episodes, but this first episode of this season lets me know that maybe they're going to go into more depth on how do we get that validation, and what do you do to be seen, and what do you do to get respect, because there's unhealthy ways of getting all those healthy needs met. Healthy needs, but there's some unhealthy ways that they could get met. So I'm hoping that this show is going to take us on that journey. Also, I didn't mention T.L. Norris, Tommy's dad, but even he in that moment fighting against some of the employees in the retirement home, he was just fighting for respect, some autonomy there. It's just like, I'm still a human. I still get to say when I'm going to go inside or stop watching the sunset. So you tell me, do you think Tommy was wrong in making the hormone comment? Do you think that Angela's reaction was toxic, or do you think it was valid? Or do you think Cami was showing actual strength, or should she have taken a different approach? I love the disagreement. I want to hear your thoughts, your analysis. Let's make this as much of a two-way street as we can. Hey, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you watching, and I can't wait to see you again next time. And until then, keep being legendary. See you then.